And so executive function and self-regulation skills are the mental processes that enable us to plan, focus attention, remember instructions, and juggle multiple tasks successfully. Executive function skills provide critical supports for learning and development. And then this is really important. While we are not necessarily born with these skills, we are born with the potential to develop them through interaction and practice. And so that's a key difference between skills and abilities. Abilities, we believe, you're born with certain abilities, and they're natural abilities, and you can work as hard as you want, but if you don't have a natural inclination towards something, there's going to be a ceiling of how good you can ever be at that, right? Skills are different. Skills, we know, can be taught, and they can be learned, and they can improve with practice. And so executive function, sure, there are some people that are just inherently better organized, or it seems like they manage their time. They just have a concept of time, just natural. Skills, we know, can be taught, and they can be learned, and they can improve with practice. And so executive function, sure, there are some people that are just inherently better organized, or it seems like they manage their time. They just have a concept of time just naturally. But these are skills, which means that for folks who struggle with this, that we can teach them how to improve these skills because they are skills, not abilities. Another good example of skills versus abilities, if you look back in the literature, the primary literature for like social skills, right? If you look back far enough, they actually refer to it as social ability. We used to think that interacting with others, that it was an ability. Some people had good interpersonal skills and some people didn't. That was it. But now we call them social skills because they can be taught, they can be learned, they can improve with practice. Folks who, high functioning, autism, formerly Asperger's, right? It doesn't like a teacher. That's great, but you might not like a boss or a coworker later. Where do we get the practice of how to navigate those kinds of situations? How do you find common ground with a teacher that you feel you don't have anything in common with? Where do you have practice doing that? You have practice doing that in school, whether it's elementary, middle school, high school, and or college. You walk away understanding how to write regardless of the purpose, how to research regardless of the question, how to interact with people regardless of how much you have in common with them, how to fix things when you screw up, how to behave and how to be confident but not cocky, right? And so these are all things that we learn in school. And it's important that we learn them in school because the cost of failure, the consequences are much graver later, right? If you screw up, mismanage your time, and go and bomb a test, well, you've got 6 or 7 more behind it to help bring up your grade. Teach folks who struggle socially how to conduct themselves appropriately in social situations and improve their social skills. So that's another kind of good example. So all this is great, but what does this actually mean? What does executive function skills mean in practice? That's a great definition, and I think it is in plain English. But in practice, what does it actually mean? So think about a air traffic control system. That air traffic controller in this big tower, right, at a major airport with landing strips going this way, that way, right through the middle. The cost of failure is pretty high, right? If these planes collide, that's a big problem. I think we can all agree. And so that tower, that executive function skills is that tower for us in our brains, right? It helps us to juggle the personal things, work things, school things, after school things, friend stuff, all those things that are going on, and prioritize what needs to be prioritized in the time that it needs our attention. Of course. Yeah, you got to. I mean, the kids, it's the one thing people fear more than death is public speaking. And for kids, sometimes speaking to a person of authority feels like public speaking. And so it requires, practice, which, and we know this, which is why many core classes as kids matriculate through school involve independent work. It involves group work. It involves creating presentations, even if it's for 3 to 5 minutes, getting up in front of the class and practicing that skill, because it doesn't really come naturally to many people.
Plenty of adults terrified, to this day because they didn't have the exposure to it.
I'll tell you a funny story, Mark. So I was speaking at a really fancy school here in Texas, and it was an audience of a bunch of so we always start with goal setting, but then, like you, which I think is great, we move right into organization, because I can't help kids if they don't have their stuff, right? So we
Yeah.
got to develop the organization system, for them, but also selfishly, so that we have what we need, the context that we need in order to teach them all the other things that we have to teach them. So we start with organization. That's physical organization, digital organization, to address the growing amount of work that never sees paper in this new educational paradigm and world we're
Mhm.
living in. And then we move into time management, the planners and portals and the relationship between the two of them with each other, and how to use them in conjunction to maximize awareness of what's coming up and make a daily and weekly plan, et cetera. Then we move into study skills, where we are, first talking about what studying is and what it isn't, how it's different than homework, some research driven ways and techniques and strategies for doing it
Point being
effectively.
that it seems like such a glaring oversight by the educational system that that's not in place. I mean, when you go to a job as an adult, it's assumed that you're going to manage your time and you're going to have a schedule and you're going to hand in your work on time. When you're a kid, it doesn't come naturally to everybody. So how you talk about the middle school to high school, but are we talking also starting even younger than that to build a foundation earlier on? Do you agree with that? And is that something that you do? And is it something, I mean, it sounds like it's something you believe schools should kind of have as a course in a sense, that kids should be
Sure.
instructed from the start.
Yeah, so there's really two things you're addressing from a services standpoint. The what we offer to families, we can start in as early as third or fourth. And most importantly, really working hand in hand with kids to understand, because not all those research driven ways are going to work, to optimize, recall, retention, and ultimately performance for that student. So then the name of the game is drawing upon our nearly 2 decades of doing this kind of work, and seeing students' profiles and saying, okay, let's start with these, but then let's tweak them, because it's not this works or it didn't. It's this worked, but maybe it can work even better if we make this tweak, right? So it's about talking about study skills, and here are some research-driven ways to do it. And now let's look at who you are as a learner and identify which of these strategies will help your input match your output, right? Will help
Mhm.
you perform to your potential. I want people's performance to reflect the time and effort that they put into something. I think exactly what you're saying is why we've structured school that way, because you need to kind of survey everything. You need to have those experiences where you like some things, don't like some things, and that you are able to persevere through both, and
Mhm.
that you learn those skills to get through both, which prepares you for life and those things we were talking about in life, where everything that you want comes with some component that you don't want, and it's important and that for the outcome that you can do both. So I think we've structured the school system for exactly that reason in that way.
It's great. It's a great perspective to have, and I think it would be wonderful if that kind of was, taught to kids earlier, so they have the concept and the sense of why they're even going to school. Because you just like you said, you follow the herd and you go through it. You go through it, and you go through all the paces of it, and you might not necessarily connect with it, but having some insight, because it's the same thing as working with children on the spectrum, or kids that struggle with organization, to be able to give them an idea of why they're doing something and what maybe is coming next in the process, to give them a little bit of that, lower the stress levels, give them that
Um,
comfortability.
and also under study skills, note taking inside and outside of class, note taking out of a textbook, active reading, test taking strategies, outlining papers, editing papers, writing thesis statements, obviously to be age appropriate, right? Because
Right.
we're working with kids starting in third or fourth grade, and then working with them, middle school, high school, and certainly early college and throughout college. So, and then the final part is my favorite, which gets into some of my doctoral research. It's called impression management. It's a term that's borrowed from the business literature, but it has to do with how, through our behavior, we can manage the impressions that other people form about us. So I tell students, I'll never ask you to love every class, every subject, or every teacher, but I will ask you to act like you love every class, every subject, and every teacher, right? So we talk about where you sit in the classroom and how you sit in your chair and how you phrase questions to teachers and what meaningful participation actually looks like, what it smells like, how you do it, why
Oh,
it's
that's great.
important.
The last thing I want to ask you is just in there's so many strategies to go with, but I just wanted to pick one area, organization skills. Um, and also in terms of people like with ADHD, do you find that how you approach it with someone who is labeled as ADHD or diagnosed as ADHD compared to someone with a just generalized learning disability, let's say. How do you approach that? And maybe you could give a strategy in how you deal with that.
So I'll give some tips. You know, I wish a show and tell would be more powerful, but I'll
Mhm.
give you some tips. And the way I think of it is um, a a really well thought out organization system is absolutely essential, critical for students who have learning differences. But those same systems certainly will also work for neurotypical kids. And so everyone will benefit, you know, from that.